What was it, over 20 minutes?
Yeah, we got 20 minutes yet.
All right, I'll stop it, let you start. Clock.
Mm-hmm.
Gotta reset. Okay, I got your stream going. Then make sure, man, so sorry. That was unnecessarily loud.
Yeah, I imagine they, whoa, woke them up, got their attention.
I saw something you needed, you may already have it, since you
What's
go
that?
by Pops.
Uh-huh.
Ace Hardware, they have a sign that says Pops Garage.
I got one at the house.
Do you have one? Okay.
They got one for me at Christmas time.
Uh-huh.
I just haven't hung it up yet.
Oh, yeah. I saw like, oh, John needs that.
Yeah, yeah. That's funny. I liked it though.
Who sends the booth email? Like, is that good out too?
Well,
I said outlet the scripture stuff tonight through email.
okay. What did you do?
Booth, that's when we're going documents.
So did you search like this color and stuff?
About that.
I mean, I don't know about like the different.
Oh,
I see what
But I have it, so. Yeah, I got it,
I wish your mom, did she hurt herself when she fell?
I actually am not sure how she's doing today.
Oh.
She's sore, but
No, I didn't mean to call her, but I was afraid I'd disturb her, you know, when they're resting or
Right.
So I don't call people when they're sick because you never know.
exactly.
I guess I could call, I could have called your dad's cell phone, maybe that would have.
If you call him, he'll just say she's fine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You never know with him, he exaggerates a lot. And then he doesn't explain too much sometimes, so it's either way too much or not enough, but somewhere in the middle there.
He explained way too much what happens when you get that big old thing that poor Danny had to get. I go,
Yes!
I go,
How many times did he have to explain that?
I know. I heard hearing them, because everyone's, when we said the step,
Right?
Ooh.
But I love how he compares it always to him.
Yeah.
I'm like, nobody is like you, Dad. Trust me.
Well, I know someone who's had a child and had kidney stones. It says is worse than having a child. That must be really, really bad.
Was it a guy that said that?
No,
though?
it was a lady.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, how did they really
No,
know?
no, she had a child and then she had kidney stones and
Oh,
having
you
a
know,
kidney
we're
stones.
made to have children. We're not made to
Yeah.
shoot out
Yeah.
kidneys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
It's not. Well, they say, oh, I was fine, no problem. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Mhm.
What were you on when they were going through all that?
Yeah.
Well, it was a little uncomfortable. Yeah, that's what it was. It was a little uncomfortable.
Right.
As I was screaming. Well, I didn't scream. I yelled a few times, but
Yeah.
I did have a 9-pound baby.
Oh, wow.
I think it was 8 pounds. So yeah. I had a big baby.
Remember how big you are? Do that? Yeah, but not on the back part. Not on the back part. It's too hard. It's too hard.
Yeah, I left it at home. With my phone. I was going to show you my phone that within 21st century now. It's a smartphone, but it's an iPhone. I got Tommy's old one. He got a new one like.
Oh, I got you.
And
I still have an old phone and I work for the company. People ask me, what type do you have? I'm like, I have a Note 4. Isn't that like a really old phone? Yeah, but it still works and I love it.
mine's an i3 or 5. I don't know. It's a 5.
Must be a 5.
It's a
3
5.
is really, really old.
It's an iPhone,
and it's
yeah.
really small.
Yeah. Well, it's still charging.
I
Okay.
mean, they're on iPhone 10s now, if
Yeah.
that tells you anything.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Tommy got the 8, I think. His was,
The 8 came out this year with the 10. The 10 it only came out because it's their anniversary.
it's just, he wasn't able to update anything, and he needs to be able to, for this job, he has to be able to do all the updating. Mine, for what I need it for, it's fine. So I do the web and now when people send me texts, I can actually see little emoticons before. I always show me just, it was a rectangle.
Oh, really?
This was supposed to be a heart, or this, oh no, it's just a rectangle.
Right.
And I do that. And I like now, when I want to send a text, I can talk into it.
Oh, yeah. You didn't have that feature before? What type of phone did you have before?
One step above a flip phone.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was really
Oh.
old.
Hey,
But
as
it
long
was
as it
pretty
works.
red.
As long as it works, why does
But
it matter?
this text is so much easier. I just talk into it. I make sure I look at it first. I go, okay.
Right,
You
because
see
sometimes.
how it pronounces it, what it says for Jaton's name. And doesn't recognize it at all. I go, oh, I didn't mean to say it.
No, I did an app that turned the voicemail that somebody leaves into a text, so that I could see it real quick at work. This one guy had a foreign accent, and I was like, what is that? And then he wrote, and it was from my USAA insurance when I got into work a while back. I was like, I have no idea what this person's trying to say, and I listened to it, I was like, the accent is really messing with this app, okay.
I got a phone call from some, and it says, I'm sorry, I can't understand you. So let me talk to you about a supervisor.
Really? That's what he said.
Yeah.
Supervisor must be busy.
Yeah, and all it was, they're wanting to buy a car that we said, we don't even have that car anymore. we traded that off years ago.
Which reminds me, we got Cleveland City, we keep forgetting. I downloaded this app on how to do DIY pallets, like pallets and those crates, how to turn those into different things.
You put some really neat stuff on there. You're like, ooh, that looks yummy. Oh, that looks really, I'll never do it. That looks really good.
Right. I haven't yet. I stopped putting all the recipes on there. And she goes, why aren't you putting recipes on there anymore? I was like, well, I didn't know everybody really cared. And she's like, that's where I get my menus. I need you to put them back on. I was like, oh, okay. So I started doing it again. And I stopped her a little bit, and she sends me a question mark. I was like, I got it. I'll start watching again.
Yeah, some of those stuff really looks yummy.
I've tried a few of them, and the ones I try, if I don't like it, I put on there. I was like, you try. Maybe you're better than I am, but I didn't like it. Ooh. My son, where he works, they get rid of their pellets, and I'm trying to find some stuff to make in my garden with pellets.
So like you make like it's like for like a raised. Yeah, that was really neat.
Look at this, honey. Hang that on the side of the fence. Vertical garden.
Stephanie, Chris, how you all
How
doing
are you?
tonight? Donna, how you doing tonight?
Pretty good.
You may not like me downloading this app. You may need it.
I got a jury summons, and I thought I was supposed to show up today. Turned out you only showed up today after you wanted to get excused or disqualified. I don't.
Oh.
I heard other people. I heard say it's okay. Everybody makes it. I heard say telling that everybody else. I go. But I went on and registered. I could have done it online.
Right.
But this one I wasn't there. I
You
registered.
can
and I was
register
able-
now that you don't want to do it?
I mean, I want to do it.
You do?
I would like to. I've never had been.
Oh, never?
Boring, it's boring.
I've done it 5 times.
But
I'm like, how old are you? I've done it 5 years, or 5 times since I've been here in Oklahoma.
this is the first time I've been since we moved here. Before, a couple of times, I didn't. Like I was like in Texas, and how I was like 50 of them, and I was number 50. so I'm gonna get it anyway.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be interesting. It might not even, so the first 2 weeks in April, May, and June. And there's two of those things you could ask for, and the first week I didn't, because Tommy has doctor's appointment. The other one, getting ready for the kids when they're coming for so she called me, okay, got all done, and so they'll email me about a week
Oh,
before.
you get to pick when you wanna do it now?
No, you pick when you don't want to do it, and they will, there's two different ones.
That's different.
Yeah,
It's definitely different.
and so, they might not get it all, but you had to be like on call, but they will complete, a week before,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, when I got it, it was be here at this time, no matter what. Like, okay, handed it to my boss, and they filled up paperwork, I went up there. I didn't get picked the first time. I was like, this was a wasted trip. I had to sit up there all day long with hundreds of people, no place to sit. It was standing room only, people were sitting in the bathroom. That's how bad it was. And then they finally said, okay, this group can leave. And I was like, I'm not part of that group, man, I'm so mad. I was like, okay. And this was the first time, I really didn't want to be there. I was really not feeling good. I didn't get picked. But I had to come back the next day for them to tell me, several of our cases have pleaded guilty, we don't need you anymore. So.
Had to go downtown?
Mm-hmm, had to go downtown.
I had to ride all the way to Arena.
Oh. Is that where yours is?
Canadian County,
Gotcha.
which is very, worked out, because, it wasn't very busy, and the parking was good.
Mhm.
Finally, someone's changing the time, thank you.
Hey, Dad, you need to download this app.
What?
You need to download this app
Why?
because it's a pretty cool app.
Why?
It's called DIY Pallets and Crates. Got a lot of
So?
stuff on it. And you like to be creative with stuff like that.
Exactly 7 p.m. According to my journal.
Must need some new batteries in this thing or something. Because it keeps getting slower and slower.
Here comes Debbie.
Oh. Oh. I didn't set it right though. I just set it on the time, but it is
Thank
7
you, I
o'clock.
appreciate that, I was about ready to do that,
I was
but,
looking at that now. He's gonna come over there backwards.
thank you. I was about ready to,
John lifted him up there.
yeah.
No, I'm just keeping him from falling backwards.
I see if I had my cell phone, I'd take a picture of that.
Now, people would like to come in.
You should have been here when you saw John lift him up there.
That's what it looked like, yeah.
Now, I don't know if I wanna sit under it now.
I would have really been upset though if you'd taken my. Never mind, John.
Oh, boy.
I'll be right back.
I still won't see you fall off and go backwards
I understand.
I was about ready to say this.
and hurt yourself.
How is Florence? Is she still dizzy, having dizzy spells?
Yeah, I've got a doctor's appointment for her in the morning. What'd you do, just mess me up now, John?
Oh, no, I just turned this part on.
Hello. Hello. These are like yours with the top.
Okay, now I got it.
You're not, now you're recording, too.
Okay.
I like how it balanced.
All right, we're gonna finish up. We're going to finish up Genesis, the 46th chapter tonight, beginning in verse 31. Verses 31 through 34 is the finishing of that. And then hopefully we'll, I don't know if we'll get 47 finished or not, but we'll get a chunk of it done. In your handout is number 1, or page 117, cap letter L. Is the last point. The customs, beliefs, and practices of different cultures often necessitate their separation. And that's what I have up there on the heading, so we'll look at that in just a moment. Some of you have asked about my wife. She's fallen about 3 times. So we got a doctor's appointment for her tomorrow. Hopefully we can get an MRI to see what's going on, find out if she's got a brain. I hope she does.
That's the problem.
That's just rude.
That's a problem, if she doesn't have a brain?
You said that.
Yeah, that would be true.
That's a problem that you said that.
Lined up right or something.
Yeah, something.
Understand why it would be questioned, what do she pick for a mate?
Yeah.
Well, that's true. She wasn't very smart there, was she?
She didn't know what she was getting into.
Oh, he opened himself up for that one.
Yeah.
John's been eating nasty nails today, I can tell.
You just walked into that one and your eyes wide open.
The Cross family's all sick, the Pritchett family's all sick,
That's how you
and that's all the announcements I have, so.
Sharon's not feeling good tonight.
Sharon's not good tonight? Okay, we need to put that.
Billy's not here.
Well, if she's not
And
not
Billy's
feeling
not
good, then she's not good.
Billy's not here.
What's that?
Cal just said.
Oh, Billy's not here?
Nah, she just tired.
So we're minus a man tonight.
Minus a man.
Remind us, the man.
She's on the
The little guy.
See, that's why she's an extra Bible. I don't think she is.
Okay,
She's invisible, whoever's sitting.
so again, Genesis 46, beginning at verse 31. And Jensen, you want to lead us in prayer tonight?
Our Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for all your many wonderful blessings. We thank you for this opportunity to be able to gather here this evening to study another portion of your word. Please be with us to help us have open minds and open hearts, that we take what we learned this evening and apply it in our lives to become better servants for you. Please be with all those who are mentioned that are not feeling well, that could not attend this evening, and pray that they recover from their ailments quickly so they can return to us and attend and worship with us again. Forgive us of our sins and repent of them. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. We might mention also, because most of you know Jay Farber, he's been down in his back since December 1st. He finally got an MRI, and I've got to go pick him up on the 26th of March, bring him into town, and he's going to have some injections put in his back. They seem to think that'll work, that he doesn't need surgery, so we'll see. But anyway, he's been down for over 3 months now, so I want to continue to keep them in your prayers too, if you will. And I'm going to try to find a way to get them moved out of that farm, because we're going to have to sell the farm since Florence's mother has passed away. And Debbie's going through that now, that process of disposing of property and everything. So those people who have done that, and many of you have, you know the issues with that. So with that said,
How big a farm does they have?
she's got 540 acres of land that has to be disposed of out there, and some mineral rights. And of course, Jay and Mary live on 5 acres on that farmhouse, but the farmhouse is about to fall apart from termites, and they don't want to continue to live there because they don't want any hard feelings with all of the kids, and there's 10 kids involved in this whole deal. So anyway, we're in the process of doing that. So Genesis chapter 46, verses 31 through the end of the chapter. Now remember, this whole deal with Genesis chapter 46, this is where the family, Jacob and all of his relatives, has been brought to the land of Goshen, or to Egypt. And of course Joseph is taking care of them. And so just concluding the chapter here. Isaac, you want to begin reading 31 through 34 for us?
And Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh and say to him, my brothers and those of my father's house who were in the land of Canaan had come to me. And the men and shepherds, for their occupation had been to feed the livestock, and they have brought their flocks, their herds, and all they have. So it shall be when Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? That you shall say, your servant's occupation has been with livestock from our youth, even till now, both we and also our fathers, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians.
Okay, so Joseph informs his family here now that he will tell Pharaoh that they have now arrived into Egypt, and that they are shepherds, and tells them to say this to Pharaoh because they are an abomination. Joseph had already chosen Goshen as the dwelling place for his family. We know that going back to Genesis 45 and verse 10. I'll read that real quick, where it says, You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near to me, you and your children's children, your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. So he's made this decision now. And though Pharaoh had echoed his invitation, he had not done so this specifically. He just invited them down to Egypt. This was Joseph's plan for Pharaoh to come to the same conclusions, though. Joseph chose Goshen for his family because it was a fertile land. If you remember the map I showed you and everything, there's a lot of branches of the river going through there, and so there's much grass for the herds and everything. It's good for grazing, and so obviously it's good for the herding of the livestock. And so Joseph makes this comment here, every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. This would be a much needed piece, if you will, of information for the shepherds moving into Egypt. Most likely is stated here to explain why this information would ensure their settlement in Goshen. Pharaoh would share the Egyptian customs, but would not want to act rudely to Joseph's family. Thus, he would send them to Goshen, virtual isolation from the rest of the Egyptians, but a perfect place for them to shepherd their flocks. You have a comment, John?
Just curiosity, who took care of the Egyptians?
Who what? Who took care?
of the Egyptians' animals?
Well, Pharaoh had...
If a shepherd is an abomination to them, who took care of their stuff?
Well,
And
but
flocks and
now,
herds?
I'm not sure that the Egyptians had sheep. Okay? These are shepherds. And so the shepherds were an abomination to the Egyptians. Egyptians had cattle. They had horses. But I don't think they had sheep. I'll have to look that up, though. Okay?
So a shepherd is someone who takes care of sheep.
Yes. Yes. In fact, if you were to go up into Wyoming and Montana, you still see this to this very day. The shepherd will be out there. He'll have a wagon out there, and he lives in that wagon while the sheep are grazing everything. And just as you see pictures of it and everything, they had their cane with a hook on it and everything. So if a lamb or something gets off in a ravine, they can reach down with that hook and pull that lamb out of the ravine.
I thought the cattlemen run them out of there.
Huh?
I thought the cattlemen run them out of there.
No, not hardly.
That's only on
You're looking at Western movies.
They had a lot of wars over it.
No, this is not Western movies. But seriously, they're there.
Says there was a lot of wars,
And
too.
you'll also see the shepherds up there with a dog. Maybe a couple of dogs. And those dogs are very well trained to watch and protect those sheep.
Well, they have to keep moving.
Yeah.
The sheep graze the grass pretty short.
Yes, they do.
They don't kill it like that. They just graze it kind of short.
Yes, they
have
do.
to keep moving the flocks. So
roots out.
And that's why in the olden days, when everybody was migrating over here, they had a problem with sheep because they would graze the grass much closer than cattle would. So,
That's why they call cattlemen, the guys that watch cattle. That's what they're
right,
saying. Okay.
right. Any other comments? All right, so
what do you call a guy who herds cats?
do what?
What do you call a guy who herds cats?
There is a book. There is a book titled that. It's a management book, Herding Cats.
Yes.
It's something, if I remember right, herding cats is like managing people. I think it's the exact title.
That's really true.
All right, so what we have here then, this statement is something of a puzzle. As Pharaoh had his own livestock, as you're mentioning, because we can go to 47 and look at verse 6, and I'll read that. It says, "The land of Egypt is before you. Have your father and brothers dwell in the best of the land. Let them dwell in the land of Goshen. And if you know any competent men among them, make them chief herdsmen over my livestock." But it does not say anything about sheep, okay? Because there's no biblical evidence that Egyptians hated shepherds. And particularly if they had sheep, they may not have hated shepherds. But so that could be somewhat puzzling. But I don't think they had sheep. I think they had other livestock. So the least convoluted explanation is that the Egyptians, who were by and large sedentary agriculturists, and who had large urban centers, considered the semi-nomadic herdsmen from the north as inferiors, which was an attitude actually reflected in Egyptian sources, and so preferred to keep them segregated in the pasture region of the Nile Delta, not far from the Sinai border. That's the other possible answer, if they did have sheep, okay? Any comments through verse 34? Yes, Dom.
I have this one version that says, keepers of sheep are unclean in the eyes of the Egyptians. So why would they be considered unclean? Because they don't like sheep. They smell like sheep, maybe.
Well, all I can do is tell you from my personal experience, sheep stink. I don't care how much you, and of course if you've gone to livestock shows, you know that sheep are there, and they groom those sheep. They trim the wool, make it real nice. They'll trim the top where it's flat and everything, and they trim the sides where it's blocked and everything. And I've judged many of sheep. They usually put them in groups of 4, and you have to judge them where you place them based on their meat potential and everything. It doesn't matter how much you wash those animals, you stick your hand down that wool and pull it out, and it smells like rotten eggs. It is the most potent, stinking stuff. Well, because when you're judging sheep, you have to do that.
You gotta feel the animal.
I will never do that.
Well, I got it. Yes.
I think it's, and it's cultural too, because the Egyptians were obsessed with cleanliness. They farmed, they bathed regularly, they shaved, they shaved the hair off their bodies.
Right.
What they did. But shepherds,
They
get a
have
bath
beards.
once in a great while.
Yeah.
If they take a bath, right? So, yeah, shepherds stink, their clothes stink, and everything else, and they just didn't like to be around them.
Right. And what's important about sheep? I mean, we haven't gone into the law yet and everything, but what was important about sheep for the Israelites?
It was a clean animal.
It was a clean animal. Clean animals had to have cloven hooves, and they had to chew a cud. Sheep do that. And so indeed they raised a lot of sheep for their food, their meat source. Do what, Jensen?
No, she said they're cute, plus they're cute.
Well, as a lamb, they're cute. All right. So let's look at chapter 47 then. And in your handout, this will be page 119. And Victor Eskew uses the title Jacob in the Land of Goshen. I think that's what I put up there, although he did choose 3 other titles as well. Settling in Egypt, Don't Leave Me in Egypt, Lived in Egypt, Buried in Canaan, or some others. He used Genesis 47 verses 5 and 6 as the key verses of Genesis. And this is where Pharaoh spake unto Joseph, saying, Thy father and thy brethren are come unto thee. And the reason for this verse is Pharaoh grants Israel the right to dwell in Egypt. Okay? So this chapter is significant in the Genesis narrative for 3 reasons. First, it bridges the gap between Genesis 12 through 36, primarily in Canaan, and it also bridges the gap between Exodus 1 and through chapter 15, set in Egypt. Okay, it tells us how the people of Israel came to settle in Goshen, and how they were able to grow into a nation of an intimidating size to the Exodus Pharaoh. And that kind of leads us into the story of Exodus when we get there. But second, it highlights a theme of the patriarchal narratives. God's people are to be a separate people. They were called from their wicked homeland to the promised land of Canaan, and though sojourners, they were never separated in Canaan. But here in Goshen, they became completely separate. So, this was so they could grow uninterrupted as a nation without interference from outsiders until they were big enough to return to the promised land and occupy it by themselves, again separated though by conquest. Now when we get into Exodus, the main thing you'll see is, and I mentioned it a little bit last week, there was a much shorter direction to get into the land of Canaan from the land of Goshen. But God didn't allow them to go that direction because they weren't large enough at that time to defeat the enemy that was in, and to take it by force, the enemies in the land of Canaan. So they went a longer route and everything, and of course we'll see that later on. But finally, this chapter displays the blessing of God on Pharaoh. And this blessing has a twofold significance, if you will. First, as with Potiphar, back in Genesis chapter 39, verses 3 through 5, and the prison keeper that we read about in Genesis 39, verse 23, it shows a fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham that he made way back in Genesis chapter 12 and verse 3. By blessing Joseph, Pharaoh secures a divine blessing for himself. Second, it shows an immediate fulfillment of Jacob's blessing of Pharaoh. Look at verse 10 of chapter 47. It says, "So Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from before Pharaoh." Okay? So it shows this immediate fulfillment of Jacob's blessing of Pharaoh. All right, so let's look at verses 1 and 2. Ron, you want to begin by reading verses 1 and 2 for us in 47?
Then Joseph went and told Pharaoh and said, "My father and my brothers, their flocks and their herds, and all that they possess, have come from the land of Canaan, and indeed they are in the land of Goshen." And he took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh.
All right, so keeping rulers, overseers, and leaders informed about matters is a wise practice. So Joseph furnishes a beautiful example of a man who could bear equally well the extremes of prosperity and adversity. High as he was, he did not forget that he had a superior, and that superior, of course, was Pharaoh. Dearly as he loved his father and anxiously as he worked, as he desired to provide for the whole family, he would not go into the arrangements that he had planned for their stay in Goshen until he had obtained the sanction of his royal master, the Pharaoh. So Joseph, in presenting his brothers, both showed respect to Pharaoh and demonstrated that he would do nothing without his knowledge and approbation. He also put honor upon them, manifesting that he was not ashamed of them. When you think about it, when he takes his brothers into Pharaoh, though now his inferiors, and that he did not harbor resentment against them, although they, as we will see, they still feel that maybe he is going to get revenge later on. Any comments through verse 2? All right, let's look at verses 3 and 4. Chris, you want to read that?
And Pharaoh said unto his brethren, What is your occupation? They said unto Pharaoh, Their servants are shepherds, both we and also our fathers. They said moreover unto Pharaoh, For to sojourn in the land are we come, for they servants have no pasture for their flock. For the famine is sore in the land of Canaan. Now therefore we pray thee, let thy servants dwell in the land of Goshen.
Okay, so in your handout, this is going to be, well, it's still capital letter A in your handout, and B on page 119. So the question is, what is your occupation? Pharaoh took it for granted that Jacob's sons had peculiar occupation, and though a shepherd was, that they were, had in abomination among the Egyptians, they did not attempt to conceal their employment. They told him up front, we're shepherds. Their interview with Pharaoh is a good model of straightforward, peaceable dealings between a pilgrim people and the temporal power. Turn to 1 Peter chapter 2. And Steffi, you want to read verses 11 through 17?
Beloved, I beg you, as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may be they may, by your good works which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation. Therefore, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether to the king as supreme, or to governors as to those who are sent by him, for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of those who do good. For this is the will of God, and by doing good you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men, as free, yet not using liberty as a cloak for vice, but as bondservants of God. Honor all people, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king.
Okay. And this, of course, would be a good example for us as Christians today. We may not agree with everything that takes place, but we have choices. If we don't agree, we have a ballot box that we can make changes. And that's the benefit of a free country. And this is the attitude that Peter had in 1 Peter of how Christians should conduct themselves. And this is what we see in Genesis here with Jacob and his family, and even Joseph in this case. The conversation took the course which Joseph had anticipated. Going back to verse 33 of chapter 46 says, so shall it be, or so it shall be when Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? Joseph anticipated that this was going to take place, and Pharaoh asked this question of Jacob and the 5 brothers that was brought before him. So he also put honor upon them then, manifesting that he was not ashamed of them, as I mentioned. So they answered according to previous instructions as they were given, manifesting, however, in their determination to return to Canaan. They wanted to make it clear that they were not here to live permanently, but this was just temporary for them until things got better up in the land of Canaan, that area. So this is a faith which affords a hopeful symptom of their having become all or most of them religious men, that they were not here to disrupt Egypt in any way. Any comments through verse 4? All right, look at verses 5 through 7. Debbie, you want to read that?
And Pharaoh spake unto Joseph, saying, Thy father and thy brother are come unto thee. The land of Egypt is before thee, and the best of the land make thy father and brethren to dwell, and the land of Goshen let them dwell. And if thou knowest any man of activity among them, then make them rulers over my cattle. And Joseph brought in Jacob his father, and set him down before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh.
Okay. Now this is kind of important because Pharaoh here is making this statement. I'm going to give the best of the land to them. Allow them to live in there. So good leaders understand that people with talents need to be put in places where they can use those talents. These folks being shepherds and everything. So Pharaoh gives them Goshen, which he realizes is the perfect place for them because of their talents, their occupation, if you will. He gave them care of his own livestock as well. This is an opportunity to advance themselves in Pharaoh's eyes, his royal administration, in their own trade, enjoying privileges and legal protection, if you will, not normally given to foreigners. So this is a good gesture on Pharaoh's part, obviously, and it is a token of the respect that Joseph had for his father to present him to Pharaoh. And it is in understanding of his place in God's eyes that he stood him before Pharaoh. Jacob blessed Pharaoh then. Joseph gave him thanks for his favor and prayed for his health and safety, for that is the blessing of an inferior to a superior. Any comments through verse 7? Yes, Cal.
I think it's also a tribute to Pharaoh, in his good sense, his esteem for Joseph and all that he has done.
That's very true.
I mean, the famine isn't over yet. Joseph is going to, Pharaoh's going to own the whole land when it's all done. And it's all going to be because of Joseph. And so Joseph, everything he touches seems to turn out just exactly right. I think Pharaoh is really a wise man.
He is.
And that he sees the talent, he sees the value there, he sees him, and so he wants to meet Jacob. He wants to meet. I want to meet his dad.
Yeah.
Of course, he meets him. How old are you?
Well, that's the next point
Yeah.
that we'll make. Look at verses 8 and 9. John, you want to read that?
And Pharaoh said unto Jacob, How old art thou? And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil days of the years of my life been, and have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage.
Okay, so this is capital letter D on page 119 of your handout, okay? So, that question, how old are you? If you ask a woman that, that's kind of insulting. They get a little upset about that. Huh?
None of your business.
Well, I know how old you are.
You're only older.
Saturday is her birthday, and Billy's birthday, and Karen's birthday. 3 St. Patty girls. The inspiration for Pharaoh's question cannot be precisely known here. When he asked that question, maybe he was just impressed with Jacob's long life. We don't know. But he could have been impressed with the many children that Jacob had as well, since the lives of pharaohs were generally short. And none of the 3 patriarchs had come into actual possession of the promised land, but he had lived there wandering about, unsettled and homeless, in the land promised to them for an inheritance. Yes, Cap?
Well, apparently, Joseph is at this age, probably what, about 35 or so?
Yeah.
Of 35. But his dad is 130. So you look
He said he was 39.
So
He said about, so I just accepted that, okay?
okay, there's somewhere about there. But anyway, when you look at it, Joseph's dad is an old man, okay? Not everybody was living those long years.
That's
but
right.
he's an old man. He looked at me and he says, how old are you? I think that was kind of how old are you?
You got to remember that Jacob had 8 sons before he ever had Joseph, and then Benjamin was the youngest. So he was an old man, and
And a girl.
a girl, yeah. So Jacob's life had been even an exaggeration of that. In Canaan, he had as little property as Abraham and Isaac. Then he fled from Esau and dwelt for 20 years in Mesopotamia. His return to Canaan stopped short of its intended destination, only to be moved further along at the Word of God. And so he's making this point that I'm not as old as my father and my father's father. His children did not play nice with the neighbors, causing stress and friction during their Palestinian journey. And now the entire family is having to move to Egypt. The ideal and hoped-for life of an Egyptian was 110 years old. And Jacob here says he's 130 years old. So he's already outlived the ideal life of an Egyptian. The reference to Jacob's age apparently served to heighten the significance of his blessing. A man whose closeness to God and favor in God's eyes is attested by his attainment of an age greater than any Egyptian dared to hope for, blesses Pharaoh. John.
Jacob used all of the land that was promised he used that land but never had a possession of it.
Right.
But he still had full use of it.
Right.
And nobody questioned his use.
But his children didn't play nice.
Well, they didn't have to play nice.
Well, it caused great stress, though, and friction with all the neighbors and everything when they didn't play nice. And so he was never able to really possess the land. He was able to use the land, but he had to keep moving.
Why do you want to possess it and have to pay taxes on it when you can use it for nothing?
None of Jacob's ancestors had as many hardships as Jacob faced, though many were of his own doing. His brother wanted to kill him. His father-in-law repeatedly deceived and treated him poorly. He was grieved by the actions of his daughter and the following massacre by his sons. He was deeply pained by Reuben's incest. His life and hope were nearly shattered by the loss of Joseph. So a lot of this was brought on by Jacob himself.
Too many wives.
Too many wives.
Too much competition.
Too much competition. That's a good point. All right, let's look at verses 11 and 12. Pat, you want to read that?
And Joseph situated his father and his brothers, and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Then Joseph provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with bread, according to the number in their family.
All right, so good and wise children will care for their parents and their families. This is cap letter E of your handout on page 119. And yeah, okay. So in contrast to the brothers' word that they would sojourn, Joseph gave them property that they owned. This was far more than they asked for or that they expected, and something that by the end of this chapter will distinguish them from the native Egyptians. Look, and I don't have it up there, go down to verse 20 if you will. It says, Then Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. Every man of the Egyptians sowed his field because the famine was severe upon them, so the land became Pharaoh's, just as John was mentioning a while ago. Now look at verses 26 and 27 if you will. It says, And Joseph made it a law over the land of Egypt to this day that Pharaoh should have 1/5, except for the land of the priests only, which did not become Pharaoh's. So Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions there, and grew and multiplied exceedingly. It is doubtful that the land of Ramesses was so called at this point, as Ramesses had not yet reigned in Egypt, though it is possible that the king was named after the city instead of the opposite. Okay? So besides pasturage then for the flocks and herds, Joseph supplied the several branches of his father's family with corn by stated allowance according to the number of their households. Any comments through verse 12? All right, Jensen, read verses 13 and 14 for me if you will.
14. Okay. Now there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain which they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house.
All right, so as I have up there, when people become dependent upon government, they become the slaves of that government, which is exactly what, when you look at communism, communist countries, that's exactly what's taking place. They're all slaves of that country. And this attitude that we're tending to have here in the United States, progressivism, I'll use it that word. This was the idea that government should do everything for everybody, which makes everybody dependent upon government. And so this is the point that's being made here, that we can become slaves of that government if we allow things to happen like that. And we see evidence of that in other countries. The universal lack of food contrasts with the provisions of food for Joseph's family in the previous verse that we read. Canaan is mentioned 3 times in verses 13 through 15, alongside the land of Egypt. These are the only 2 places important to the biblical narrative, the promised land and the current residence of the chosen people. That the money had to be found employs the idea that it had to be diligently sought out. The sense is that the people fervently rummaged for money, bringing every last penny for food. Joseph did not keep or pilfer from the money used for purchase of the grain. He was honest in his dealing with Pharaoh. And so Pharaoh obviously became very rich as well, because he was able to gain much land as a result of all this. Any comments through verse 14? All right, Donna, read verses 15 through 17 for me, please.
When the money was all spent in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us food, for why should we die in your presence, for our money is gone?" Then Joseph said, "Give up your livestock, and I will give you food for your livestock, since your money is gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses and the flock and herds and the donkeys, and he fed them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year.
All right, so the people had many things taken from them to pay for the government's assistance.
Well,
Yes, John.
That verse answered the question. They did have flocks.
Yeah. Which verse?
17.
17. Yeah, it says for the in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the cattle. Yeah, but this wasn't talking about the Egyptians. This was talking about the people who were wanting food, and they were given these things because they ran out of money.
15's talking about the Egyptians for their money failed. Joseph said in 16, "Give us your cattle, because your money failed," and they brought their cattle to Joseph and gave them and their flocks. It's continuing from the Egyptians. It
Okay.
hasn't changed to the other people yet.
All right, in verse 15 it says all the Egyptians and everything. Okay. But I think it's all encompassing of the other people too, coming in wanting food as well. The famine obviously was so severe that the Egyptians ran out of money to purchase grain, and that's the point that John's making here. And so with no money, they came to Joseph, to whom they can appeal with confidence, as he has proved to be the nation's savior, obviously, up to this point. So it was axiomatic in the ancient world that one paid one's way so long as one had anything to part with, including, in the last resort, one's liberty. You know, what I mean by that is, the last resort, they would actually become a slave to get food for their family if need be. The livestock brought included horses, flocks, herds, and donkeys, as John mentioned here. That all of these were brought shows how dire the need was in this case. Needless to say, not everyone did this at the same time. And this is the first time that horses are mentioned in Scripture. The patriarchs, as far as we can learn, had no horses, nor are any mentioned among the possessions of Israel when they left Egypt. Look at Exodus 12 and verse 38, if you will. Let's see, I do have that up there. That may be just a short verse. Yeah, let me read that. A mixed multitude went up with them also, and the flocks and herds, a great deal of livestock. Am I reading the right verse? Yeah. Okay.
Well, camels were more useful.
Do what?
Camels were more useful.
Camels were much more useful because they could travel over great barren land where there was no water.
And they could live off they didn't have to have grains or fine grass to eat. They could eat thorny bushes and anything else.
Yeah, that's very true. All right, so Cal, read verses 18 and 19 for me, if you will.
And when that year was ended, they came to him the next year and said to him, and speaking of people coming before Pharaoh, "We will not hide from my lord that our money is all spent, and the cattle are my lord's. There is nothing left for my lord except our bodies and our lands. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food, and we and our land will be slaves to Pharaoh. So give us seed that we may live and not die, that the land may not be desolate."
Okay. So, as I have when that year had ended, the food they purchased with their livestock was only sufficient for 1 year then. Now they approached Joseph again and though this time with nothing but their bodies and land. So as long as there was something to pay with, the Egyptians would pay their way. Those who would cast Joseph as cruel in this ignore that it was not his idea, but it was their idea to either give themselves or their land for the food. This is, after all, the logical thing to do, to pay your way. The price paid is not too high, for the thing at stake is their very lives in this situation. Either the famine was nearing its end, allowing them to soon be able to work their lands again, or a bit of sowing was attempted every year in a few places where the land might yield slight results. Any comments up through verse 19?
I haven't read any research, but they had to have been an extended drought across North Africa there for the Nile not to flood.
Right.
So it was very, very dry, and probably very hot during that time. And so the Nile couldn't flood. That's why they couldn't grow their crops.
Yeah.
So they could do some irrigation from the Nile, but it would be limited in scope.
Well, and that's very true. And there were many countries that were dependent upon the Nile, but there were other countries that there were other reasons why there might have been a drought in their areas. So, well, we didn't get completely through with chapter 47, but we'll finish it next week. We'll start at verse 20 next week.